The door to the Timber Pass Sheriff's Station slammed open, wind howling in behind a shape none of them expected. A German shepherd, matted with blood and snow, limping, barely standing, dragged himself in and collapsed, tied to his back, with pieces of scarf and shoelaces. Was a small girl, unconscious, her face pale, her hair tangled and dark with dried blood. The room froze. No one moved. Then Sheriff Riley stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "That's Lucy Parker. She's been missing for 3 days." But the dog, he wasn't dead. His eyes opened slowly. He looked up, not at the sheriff, but at the door, as if saying, "It's not over yet. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you. Please give this video a like and consider subscribing." The wind had clawed through Timber Pass all night, dragging snow like claws across the empty streets. It was the kind of storm that turned familiar paths into foreign territory, muffling the world under a white hush. Timber Pass, nestled high in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, woke beneath a blanket of heavy snow and silence, the pine trees outside bending low in reverence or surrender. It was just past 7 in the morning when the glass doors of the Timber Pass Sheriff's Department groaned open. Riley Dawson, the town's long-serving sheriff, looked up from his desk as the door clattered back against the wall. And for a moment, just a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. A dog stood there, large, muddied, bloodied, a German shepherd with thick sable fur soaked in snow, ice crusted to the tufts behind his ears, and red-brown smears along his flank. He stood for barely 2 seconds before collapsing onto the linoleum floor with a heavy thud, his body trembling from exhaustion. But it wasn't just the dog. On his back, tied down with what looked like a torn scarf and an unraveling pair of children's shoelaces, lay a girl. Riley rose in slow horror, his eyes locked on the small, unmoving figure draped over the dog's shoulders. "Lucy," he whispered, his voice cracking. 9-year-old Lucy Parker, missing for 3 days, was unconscious, her blonde hair matted with dirt and blood. Her small hands were pale, her face slack and silent. There was a dark bruise blooming beneath her left eye, but she was breathing. Riley dropped to one knee, his hands reaching without hesitation. "It's her. It's Lucy," behind him. Deputy Tanya Cohen, just arriving with a travel mug of black coffee, gasped so sharply she spilled it down her coat. "My God, she's alive," Riley said, already unfastening the knots holding her to the dog's back with careful fingers. "Barely." He looked at the dog again, a name surfacing from a long-forgotten memory. Whiskey. The dog, Whiskey, lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name. His amber eyes were clouded with pain, but they held recognition. Riley had seen those eyes before. Whiskey had once belonged to Melissa Parker. Melissa, the fire captain's wife, strong, smart, quiet, a woman with a military past and a way with dogs. She had walked into Timber Pass with purpose years ago and left behind more than memories when she died in that fire. Whiskey had been hers, loyal, precise, almost unnaturally aware after Melissa died. Whiskey had been given up, left behind like a memory too sharp to carry, but Lucy, tiny, grieving Lucy, had found him again a year later at a rescue shelter. And when she did, something passed between them, something wordless, something deeper than blood. Riley stared down at the two of them, the girl and the dog, bound by loss and fate. He turned to Tanya, his voice low and urgent. "Call the paramedics, now." Outside, the storm howled like a warning. Inside, The girl shivered, and the dog watched her, refusing to look away even as his body gave out. The storm had not relented. Snow continued to fall like ash from a burning sky, burying Timber Pass inch by inch beneath its relentless silence. The sheriff's department buzzed with quiet urgency as paramedics worked to stabilize Lucy in the back room, while Whiskey lay on a thick blanket just outside the infirmary, too wounded to move but too stubborn to close his eyes. Sheriff Riley Dawson hadn't left the hallway since they arrived. He stood now by the frost-streaked window, arms crossed, watching flakes blur against the glass. His mind was elsewhere, 5 years back, to the fire. Melissa Parker's fire. Her death had changed everything in Timber Pass. Melissa had been Riley's friend before she married Eric. Not close, not intimate, but deeply respectful. She was tall, athletic, with a calm that made others settle around her. Auburn hair, usually tied back in a no-nonsense braid. Sharp green eyes that missed little. She carried herself like someone who had once worn a uniform because she had. Melissa had served as a military dog handler in Iraq. That's where she met Whiskey. Then a wiry, intense 3-year-old German shepherd trained for bomb detection and search and rescue. The dog had scars on his back legs when she brought him home. Shrapnel wounds from a roadside blast that had killed his first handler. Melissa never talked about it. But she loved Whiskey like he was family. When Lucy was born, she trained the dog to respond to her presence like he would a high-priority target, teaching him a command she jokingly called treasure mode. It meant find her, protect her, even when no one else could. Now. As Riley watched Whiskey stare blankly toward the infirmary door, he couldn't shake the sense that the dog wasn't just wounded. He was waiting, watching, still working a job Melissa had given him long ago. He turned as the door behind him opened. Sheriff. The voice belonged to Deputy Claire Young. She was carrying a cardboard folder and a black knit cap still wet with snow. Claire was in her late 30s, lean and fast-moving, with wind-chapped skin and a way of speaking that was always a little too direct. She and Riley had history. Everyone in Timber Pass knew it. Their romance had ended years ago, more due to timing than drama, but they had never quite learned how to be only co-workers. Claire tossed the folder onto the desk beside Riley and pulled off her gloves. "You said Lucy was found with Whiskey." Riley nodded. Claire's eyes narrowed. "You know Melissa trained that dog to protect her kid." "Right, she told me once." Riley said quietly, "Didn't think I'd see proof of it." Claire hesitated, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "There's something else. I've been revisiting the fire, Melissa's death." "I pulled the old report. That was ruled accidental," Riley said. Though the words lacked conviction, Claire gave him a hard look. "You and I both know it shouldn't have been." She flipped open the folder, revealing photos, burn patterns, charred timbers, a small square section marked with red ink. The garage. She was investigating something. Claire continued. "She told me, 2 weeks before the fire, that someone was using the Timber Outreach Fund to cover up movement of foster kids through the area, that they were disappearing into thin air. She thought it was connected to this guy, Clinton Maddox." Riley frowned. "Maddox. That name's been floating around since the 90s. "Exactly," Claire said. "He runs 6 youth support nonprofits across Washington and Oregon. They all look legit, until you realize every single one has a high turnover of teenage girls, most of whom are undocumented or in foster care. No follow-ups, no school transfers, just gone." Riley rubbed his temples. "You think Melissa found something on him?" Claire nodded. "And I think someone found out she did She pulled out a grainy photo. This was taken 2 days before the fire. Maddox at the Timber Outreach Fund office. Melissa went there that same afternoon. You do the math. Outside. Whiskey let out a low growl, soft but intent. Claire and Riley both turned to look. The dog was still lying down, but his ears had perked, eyes fixed now not on the infirmary, but the front door. Riley stepped toward him. "What is it? Boy?" The dog didn't move, only watched. Claire crouched beside him, eyeing the blood along his rib cage. "You think he followed her trail?" "He didn't just follow it," Riley said. "He carried her back through a blizzard." They were silent for a moment. Then Claire stood. "I want to reopen Melissa's case." Officially, Riley gave her a look. "I know it means going against the coroner's report," she said. "But if Melissa was right, and if Maddox is behind this, Lucy might not be the only child in danger." The sheriff looked through the glass toward Lucy's small form, now stirring under a warming blanket. "You've got your green light," he said, "but do it quiet. If Maddox has ears in this town, I don't want him knowing we're digging." Claire nodded, her expression hardening. "I'll need full access to Melissa's files, whatever you need," Riley replied. "And Claire, be careful." "I always am," she said, though the tension in her jaw said otherwise, later that night, as the storm began to ease. Riley sat alone in his office, the folder of burn photos open before him. Whiskey slept lightly in the corner, tail twitching. Every time Lucy so much as shifted, the dog stirred. The sheriff glanced again at the faded photo of Clinton Maddox, smiling like a saint outside a shelter bearing his name. Some monsters didn't wear masks. They wore funding badges and donated coats. The storm had begun to die sometime after midnight, but the cold had only grown more vicious, pressing down on the forest like a weight of silence. Out beyond Timber Pass, beyond the county roads and snow-plowed lanes, the Cascade Pines closed in dense and dark, and in those shadows, where no human had walked in days, one lone creature carved a trail through wind and white and blood. Whiskey moved with purpose. The German shepherd's body ached. His paws were raw from frozen ground and ice-sharp brambles. His side throbbed from an injury reopened, an old scar torn fresh as if the past were clawing its way forward again. But nothing slowed him. He had heard her 3 nights earlier, as Eric Parker Gaunt, glassy-eyed, wearing the same flannel he'd slept in for 2 days, stumbled around his living room in grief and bourbon haze. Whiskey had sat silent by the front door. Then the wind shifted, and he heard it, a high-pitched cry, faint, muffled, but not imagined. Lucy's voice, somewhere out in the dark. No one else had heard it. No one else had believed. But Whiskey moved. He'd slammed his body against the front door again and again until the latch gave. He had slipped into the storm and vanished into the tree line, following instinct and scent and something deeper than memory. He had tracked her across 2 frozen creeks, through snowfall that turned tracks to whispers. He caught the tang of chloroform on pine bark, the acrid stench of unwashed men, diesel, cheap cigarette smoke. By the second day, he'd stopped noticing the pain. He focused only on what Melissa had trained into him years ago. When the scent sharpens, slow your steps. When the world goes quiet, drop your body low. When you're close, when you smell the girl's fear and hear her sobbing through walls, wait. Choose the moment. That moment came at dusk, hidden behind a thicket of brush and half-collapsed snow fencing. Whiskey spotted the cabin. It was less a structure than a ruin, a hunting shack long forgotten, with tarps nailed across shattered windows and an old Ford truck parked under a makeshift canvas awning. Smoke drifted from a bent chimney pipe. The scent was thick now. Lucy's scent. Alive. Afraid, somewhere inside. Whiskey waited until the guards moved. There were 2 men, both large, both bundled in military surplus coats. One had a long, knotted beard that dripped ice from his chin. The other smoked constantly, his breath clouding around the ember in his fingers. They moved in shifts, one patrolling with a rifle slung loose, the other pacing the porch, staring at a phone screen when the bearded man moved toward the outhouse with a flashlight, and the smoker ducked inside for a thermos refill. Whiskey ran. He darted around the rear of the cabin. Finding a side window half covered in cardboard, he leapt, pain lancing through his shoulder, and crashed through the weak point with a crunch of wood and glass. Inside, the cabin erupted in confusion. Lucy was tied to a bed frame in the corner, a dirty blanket around her shoulders and duct tape over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with shock and sudden hope. The man who'd been guarding her, a gaunt figure in his 50s, with thinning blonde hair and a bruise blooming under his jaw, stared at the dog too late. Whiskey went for the throat. There was no bark, no warning, only speed and teeth and fury. Melissa had trained him never to kill, only to incapacitate, but that didn't mean the man walked away unharmed. He hit the wall hard, screaming, blood pouring from his arm. Whiskey lunged again, this time pushing the man away from the bed, pinning him with his weight as Lucy squirmed free of her bindings. She scrambled toward the broken window, fingers bleeding, boots scraping across the cracked floorboards. "Whiskey," she gasped, hoarse. "Whiskey." Go gunfire erupted outside. The bearded man had returned, rifle drawn. He fired once through the cabin wall. The bullet hit a shelf of canned food. Wood splintered. Lucy screamed. Whiskey leapt forward, knocking her to the ground and covering her with his body. More shouting. Footsteps on the porch, doors slamming. Whiskey bolted, herding Lucy toward the back door as the smoker kicked it open with a flashlight and knife in hand. Whiskey growled, deep, low, and primal. The man froze. That half-second was all they needed. Lucy darted past, diving into the snow. Whiskey followed, blood trailing behind him in thick drops. They vanished into the trees before the men could reload. Across town, in a windowless archive room beneath Timber Pass's old courthouse, Claire Young clicked through scanned documents on a dusty computer screen. Her fingers moved with increasing urgency. Folders marked Mountain Hands, grants and logistics open to spreadsheets, volunteer lists, and logs of supply deliveries to shelters across the state. Then she found it. Satellite Youth Aid Camp, Central Cascade Region. Claire leaned closer. The coordinates placed it just north of Timber Pass, deep into the forested hills, near an area where several runaway reports had clustered in recent years, and where, according to Melissa's old journal entry, she had gone the day before her death. Claire printed the file. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. Mountain Hands wasn't just a charity, it was a front. Melissa had been right, and someone had killed her for it. She stood, grabbed her jacket, and hurried toward Riley's office, but she didn't notice the dark SUV parked across the street, engine running, its driver watching the courthouse with the phone pressed to his ear. The sun had finally broken through the storm by morning, glinting off the snowdrifts like shards of broken glass. Timber Pass, blanketed in fresh white, looked deceptively peaceful, but inside the sheriff's department, the air was taut with fear. Whiskey hadn't moved in hours. He lay motionless on a thick quilt near the back wall, his breathing shallow, his muzzle flecked with dried blood. The heat lamp above him buzzed softly, casting his fur in a warm, coppery glow that did little to thaw the tension in the room. His side had been wrapped hastily by the town's only veterinarian, Dr. Ellen Sutter, who had driven through the blizzard from her small clinic on the edge of town. Ellen was in her mid-50s, short and sharp-eyed, with salt and pepper hair tied back in a bun and a brisk manner honed from years of treating farm animals in crisis. She wore a faded green parka and smelled faintly of iodine and hay. She'd done everything she could, antibiotics, warm fluids, bandages, but the blood loss had been severe. Whiskey remained unresponsive, caught in a battle somewhere between instinct and surrender. Lucy sat beside him, legs crossed, one hand resting gently on his paw. She hadn't spoken since returning from the woods. Her face was pale, lips chapped from cold, but her eyes held that peculiar brightness, like a lantern lit in the darkest cellar of the soul. Sheriff Riley knelt down beside her. "How's he doing?" he asked softly. Dr. Sutter shook her head without looking up. "I've seen dogs survive worse, but not many. He needs rest, and time we may not have." Lucy looked up suddenly. "He's not done yet?" Riley met her gaze. "What do you mean?" She turned back to Whiskey. "Mom used to say Whiskey always had a job to finish. She said if something ever happened to her, he would know what to do." Riley exchanged a glance with Dr. Sutter, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "There was a game we used to play," Lucy continued, her voice quieter now, "called Find the Treasure. Mom would hide something, a toy, a photo, once even her car keys, and give Whiskey a signal. He'd search the whole yard until he found it. That's how she trained him," Riley murmured. Lucy nodded, "But I think it was more than a game. I think she was teaching him something." The room was silent for a long beat, then, without warning, Whiskey's tail moved just once, a faint thump against the blanket. His ear twitched. Lucy's breath caught. "Whiskey," she whispered. The dog's amber eyes opened a crack, then fluttered closed again. But he was alive. Something was shifting inside him, pulling him upward from whatever frozen place he had slipped into. Riley stood. "Call Claire within 20 minutes." Deputy Claire Young arrived. Her face flushed from the cold. She brought with her a thin leather-bound notebook, something Melissa had kept in her desk drawer at the Timber Outreach Fund before her death. Claire had retrieved it during a late-night break-in the week before, and hadn't had time to go through it properly until now. "I think she left us something," Claire said, flipping through the pages. "Look, here." She laid the notebook on the desk, pointing to a page covered in Melissa's tight, slanted handwriting. "Treasure, Yao, fallback protocol, W's trained to lead, Cascade Lake Cave, test drills, hidden case inside East Chamber." Riley leaned over the notebook. "Cascade Lake. That's the old ranger site." "Right?" Claire nodded. "There's a cave system beneath the ridge near the eastern shore. Melissa used to take Whiskey out there for extended training, claimed it was for search and rescue drills. But I think she was preparing for something more." "You think she hid evidence there?" Riley asked. "I'd bet my badge." Riley turned to Lucy. "You think he could still lead us?" Lucy placed her hand gently on Whiskey's head. "He will. By noon." They were loading Whiskey into the back of Claire's Orwas-4 SUV, wrapped in blankets, with a portable heater humming beside him. Lucy sat up front beside Claire, holding the notebook like it was a compass. Riley drove behind them in the department's cruiser, armed and alert. Cascade Lake shimmered in the afternoon light, its surface frozen solid except for a narrow crack running down the center like a fracture in glass. They parked at the ranger station ruins and trekked the last half-mile on foot. Claire carried Whiskey in her arms for part of it, until he growled softly and insisted on walking, wobbling but determined. When they reached the mouth of the cave, Whiskey stopped. His ears lifted slightly. His nose twitched. Then he moved forward. He led them into the dark. The cave swallowed sound. Their footsteps echoed off walls slick with ice, and their breath fogged in front of their flashlights. Whiskey moved slowly but deliberately, nose low to the ground, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. They reached the eastern chamber after 20 minutes. It was a small alcove tucked behind a narrow outcropping of rock. Whiskey limped forward, circled once, and began pawing at the frozen ground near the wall. Claire dropped to her knees and helped clear the snow. Beneath it, buried under a layer of packed earth and stones, was a waterproof case, military grade, marked with Melissa's initials. Riley opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, documents, a USB drive, and a small voice recorder. He picked it up, pressed play. Melissa's voice filled the cavern. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. But Whiskey did what I trained him to do. Inside this case is everything: names, accounts, movement logs, and proof that the Timber Outreach Fund is being used to traffic miners through Cascade County. Clinton Maddox is behind it. I tried to warn people, but no one would listen. If this message reaches you, please protect Lucy and trust the dog. He always knew." Claire swallowed hard. Riley's hands tightened around the recorder beside them. Whiskey lay down, eyes half closed, breath steady. His job, at least this one, was done. The wind had returned, not as a storm, but as a whisper curling through the trees outside the Parker home. Snow still lingered in the ditches, but the sky was clear, soft blue like pressed cotton. The house stood quiet at the edge of Timber Pass, half forgotten and still bearing the weight of memory: weathered wood, broken gate, a porch swing that no longer moved. But inside, the past was about to erupt into the present. Eric Parker, freshly shaven for the first time in weeks, sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, his hands trembling only slightly. His face was still drawn, but the fog that had cloaked him since Melissa's death was beginning to lift. He wore an old fire department hoodie and jeans, and his eyes, dark, deep-set, were clearer than they had been in years. Across the table, Lucy sat quietly with a sketchbook, drawing Whiskey's face in broad, soft pencil strokes. The real dog lay curled at her feet, breathing slow but steady. Whiskey had been healing quickly. Too quickly, Dr. Sutter had said, almost as if the dog's will alone was stitching his wounds back together. He still limped, still winced at sudden movement, but there was steel behind those amber eyes again. Eric reached down, resting a hand on Whiskey's shoulder. "Thanks for bringing her back," he murmured. Whiskey didn't move, but his tail gave a single thump against the floor. Lucy looked up, her tone solemn. "Mom said he'd always protect me, even when we weren't watching." Then the door burst open. Clinton Maddox stepped through like a shadow taking form. He wore a dark wool coat over a gray suit, the lapels dusted with snow. His hair was neatly combed, silver-streaked and slick. At first glance, he looked like a banker or a politician, composed, calm, cultivated, but his eyes were small and black, and his smile was wrong. Behind him came two men in tactical gear, black-clad, faceless beneath balaclavas. One held a sidearm. The other carried a black duffel. "Don't move," Maddox said smoothly, drawing a silenced pistol from his coat. "Mr. Parker, I've come for what your wife stole." Eric stood, hands raised instinctively, pushing Lucy behind him. She didn't steal anything. Maddox stepped farther into the room, eyes flicking briefly toward the dog, the girl, the evidence, the mutt. It all ends here. Whiskey had not moved. His eyes tracked Maddox, then the guards. His ears flicked once. He waited. Maddox waved the pistol toward Lucy. "Bring her." Eric stepped forward, but the guard raised his weapon. That's when Whiskey moved. It was fast. So fast that even Maddox didn't fire in time. Whiskey lunged from beneath the table, jaws wide, going not for Maddox, but for the arm of the guard holding the duffel. The man screamed as teeth clamped down, and the bag dropped, spilling ammunition and cable ties across the floor. The other guard fired. The sound was muffled, but the impact was not. Whiskey yelped and dropped, blood blooming beneath his shoulder. "Stay down," Maddox shouted. Waving his gun wildly, Whiskey did. He didn't move, not a twitch. Maddox turned to Lucy, livid. "Pick her up." Now, but then. Glass shattered in the back of the house. Voices, boots, flashlights. "FBI, drop your weapons." The room erupted. Riley Dawson came in through the hallway, rifle raised, face grim and steady. Claire was beside him, pistol aimed dead at Maddox. The two guards reached for weapons, but were shot down before they could aim. Maddox tried to use Lucy as a shield, but Eric tackled him to the ground. Whiskey still hadn't moved, until Lucy broke from her father's grasp and ran to him. "Whiskey," she sobbed, falling to her knees. "Please, don't be gone." Riley moved forward cautiously, crouching beside the dog. He put 2 fingers to Whiskey's chest, then smiled. His heartbeat strong. He's playing dead. Claire blinked. "Trained for it." Riley nodded. Melissa taught him last-ditch survival response. Whiskey opened one eye. Lucy cried harder and threw her arms around his neck. 1 year later. Spring returned to Timber Pass. The mountain thaw bloomed into soft green, and the air smelled of wet bark and pine needles. On a small stage set up in front of the Timber Pass Town Hall, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors, law enforcement, local families, and a camera crew from Seattle. The FBI director himself stood at the podium. "Today, we recognize not just the bravery of our agents or the diligence of local law enforcement, but a dog who held to his purpose through pain, separation, and time, Whiskey. The German Shepherd trained by the late Melissa Parker, carried her mission to its end and protected the only child she left behind." He turned. "Lucy, would you join us?" 9-year-old Lucy stepped onto the stage in a simple blue dress, her hand resting on Whiskey's back. The dog wore a polished leather collar, newly issued, with a medallion inscribed, "Guardian of Cascade." The director knelt and pinned a silver badge to Whiskey's vest. "On behalf of the United States government," he said, "we recognize you as a civilian protector with extraordinary service in the defense of others." The crowd erupted in applause. Eric stood off to the side, cleaner, stronger, holding a camera with shaking hands. The man who had once buried his grief in Whiskey now stood sober beside a daughter who trusted him again. They had begun rebuilding together. Claire Young, now permanently assigned to a regional task force investigating child trafficking, stood near the back. She exchanged a smile with Riley, who leaned against the stage with a quiet pride he rarely showed, and Whiskey scarred, limping slightly, his muzzle now flecked with gray, stood watch, because even though the case was closed, the mission was never truly over. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes, they walk on 4 legs, battered but unbroken, with a vow written not in words but in devotion. Whiskey was not just a dog, he was a vessel of loyalty, trained by love, strengthened by faith, and called into action by something greater than instinct. His story reminds us that God often works through the quiet ones, those who stay when others leave, who protect even when they bleed, who carry the burdens we cannot, in a world full of noise, confusion, and brokenness. Perhaps the clearest sign of divine presence is in the loyalty of a creature who never stops trying to bring us home. Just like whiskey followed the path Melissa set. Even through fire and snow, we are reminded that we too have a purpose, sometimes hidden, sometimes painful, but always worth pursuing. And in moments when we feel lost or overwhelmed, may we remember that God can send help in forms we least expect, and that redemption is never out of reach for those who keep their eyes open and their hearts faithful. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below saying, "Amen," to honor all the unsung protectors in our lives, dogs, people, angels in disguise. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to this channel to follow more true stories of loyalty, faith, and second chances. And may God bless you and your family, just as He blessed Lucy and Eric with a second chance through a guardian named Whiskey.